Hey everyone. Welcome, welcome. This is Tara Lynn. You are here for the stained glass and rainbows step by step. The design itself takes a little bit longer than normal, and I'm going to go through some of the prep work with you with the color mixing just to make sure we're all on the same page. Also, if my voice sounds funny, I've totally got a winter cold, so I'm sorry if that's weird, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to show you how to get your surface ready. So I've got an 8-inch, it's about 8 inches or 20 centimeters. I tend to measure metric since it's more exact. What you're going to want to do is find the center. I used a 6-arm stencil or a 12-arm stencil to make my guidelines. And what you're going to want to do is once you have your center and your 6 guideline marks, you just want to extend those to the edge with your chalk pencil. Anytime that you want to design your own pattern and you want it to look like stained glass, a really easy way to do that is to go ahead and divide up your palette or your surface. And then what you're going to do is avoid your guidelines. So you're going to work in each space, but you're not going to touch your guidelines. And that will give you even divisions. It will look a little more like stained glass. Of course, there's lots of different ways to do it, but this is a nice, easy way. So I've got 12 sections here. That's what I'm going for. And then what you're going to want to do is make guidelines every 1 centimeter. So I'm going to use my compass. If you want to use your stencil, you can do that. Small one is always the hardest. Oops. All right, so I've got rings about every 1 centimeter. You could do every 2 centimeters and just understand that I'm working with 10 rings. So if you end up with 5, you may need to put a dot or 2 in the halfway point. But this is how I've got my guidelines marked on there for the stained glass. All right, I'm going to set this aside for just a second, and I'm going to talk about paint colors. So we're working with a rainbow, and we've got 12 sections. So whichever rainbow palette you pick, and it doesn't matter which one, I've got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Okay, so basically I'm just going to create a halfway color. And if you see some white in here, this is actually not white paint. That's just a little bit of flow medium, and that helps me thin my paints a little bit. The ones that I'm using are a little bit older, so they've had time to kind of evaporate out. But in between my red and orange, I'm just going to mix equal parts to make a red-orange. And so each color is going to have a halfway in between. So red-orange, and then I've got orange-yellow. Yellow-green. A green-blue. The palette, the colors, the rainbow palette that I've chosen is the desert palette, which has a lot of muted colors. So if muted is not your thing, you can definitely pick a different one. But what we want to end up is our 6 rainbow colors and then half and half of each in between. There's sometimes too, as well, if you are mixing equal parts paint, sometimes equal parts does not always make visually a halfway in between colors. So just be aware of that as well. Sometimes you have to tweak them just a little bit, but I try to get them pretty even. So just to give you kind of a visual, here's what mine look like after they're all mixed up. So you just want kind of evenly spaced colors. You can use them straight from the bottle, or you can mix them half and half like I did. I need to adjust mine just a smidge. All right, I am happy with my colors. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And so I'm just going to refer to them as I have them listed on the step-by-step guide. Red, red, orange, 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 yellow, 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 green, 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 blue, 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 violet, violet, and violet red, or purple red. So that way we can work through the color palette together. It'll make more sense as we get started. So here is my piece here, and what we're going to do is get a 4mm tool. And I'll show you on my sample. The first thing we're going to do is create a long teardrop. So this was, should be, let me get my little measurement cheater tool here. I believe this was 2 millimeters, or 2 centimeters from the inside. So our rings are every centimeter around the middle. And so what we're going to do is, and it doesn't matter which color you start with, I'm going to start with red. You're going to put that dot right on the first ring in the center. Or I'm sorry, that's the second ring. Ugh. Sorry, getting flustered. So you're going to skip the first ring. We're starting on the second ring, 2 millimeters out with a 4mm tool. And then you want to use a small stylus and roll it across your piece. Just kidding. Use a small stylus and you're going to pull that into a teardrop shape. And we're going to do this with each and every color. Remember, do not touch your guidelines. So keep that in the space. So I'm going to start with red and then I'm just going to work my way around. Red, orange. And this is where it gets time consuming because each and every color you have to stop and make your design and then clean off your tool and then move on to the next color. So we're going to just move around the color spectrum. And a little tip, the end where it meets the middle does not have to be perfect because we are putting a mirror right in that center. So you want to pull it in as far as you can without messing it up. But remember, we're going to hide the very middle with a mirror anyway. One, two. If you get confused where you are with your color spectrum, like you can make little cheats here, like I labeled the top of my cups purple, red, 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 orange, 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 yellow, etc. And remember, you can always use chalk to mark on your piece, and that will wipe off when you're done. So I can put red, red, orange, 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 yellow, yellow. So if that helps you, if visually you have a little bit of trouble remembering which color you're on, you can always label them with chalk as well. Or you can use numbers, whatever makes the most sense for you. But since I'm referring to mine by color, that's what I'm going to do, is just kind of mark them by color. So each time I start, I'm going to start with this purple red since it's my first color here and work my way around. So each section calls for one long teardrop 4mm tool. We start that on the second ring. Now you'll see on the sample as we work out, and I'm not going to keep this on camera. I'm going to have you refer to the one up in the corner on the video because this is reflective. But there's a lot of empty space, and that's part of what gives it that stained glass look. So we definitely want where the chalk lines are to stay clear, but also there's a little bit of a gap in between where we're creating as well. So the next step here, we're going to continue with the 4mm tool, and then on the next ring is 2 dots in the coordinating color. So I'm going to start with purple red, 4mm, and it's 2 dots. So on the third ring, 2 dots in each space all the way around with the coordinating color, 4mm. I'm not changing anything. I've got a few bubbles, so I'm just going to pop those. Next step is an easy one. We're going to use our 6mm tool. We're on ring 4, and we're just going to match the color. And we have one 6mm dot on the ring in the center of each space, in the center of each slice. So I've got my 6mm dotting rod, and we're going to match the color to the slice of pizza, or the slice of pie, however you want to think about it. And this is just one 6mm dot on the ring. For the next step, we're going to do a double swipe. So it's this part here of the pattern. And this first swipe starts on the next ring. So this was ring 1, 2, 3, 4. So on ring 5, I'm going to label those just so I know what I'm talking about. So this is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You don't have to label them, but just for my reference. So on the next ring is where we're going to start this set of double swipes. And really, you can do, if you're following along on the guide, we're doing 2 swipes on the left, 2 swipes on the right. We can combine this step because we're using, we'll use the same color for the left and the right. So I'm starting with my purple red. I've got a 2.5 millimeter stylus. You could go down to 2. If you don't have a 2.5, I would go down versus up. But I'm going to go to that ring 5, and I'm going to do 1 swipe to the right of the dot and 1 swipe to the left. And then we're doing a second one. So I'm going to go up about a half a ring and 1 to the right and 1 to the left. So we start our first swipes just by the ring, and then the next one halfway in between ring 5 and 6. And of course, we're matching the colors. This is one of the harder elements in the design, just because, well, for me anyway, I feel like when I'm making these swipes, they're never perfect, but it becomes less noticeable as we work out the design that the placement might not be exactly the same. So don't stress about that. right, next step, we're going to create some large teardrops. So these are going to be placed right in the center of the slice, and the teardrop point is going to go outward. So this is going to go on ring 6. And of course, we're going to match the colors. 6mm tool. So on ring 6, you're going to make your dot. And then we're going to use a small stylus, pull that out to ring 7, and then turn it into a teardrop. And we're going to do that in every color. So take your time and work your way around. All right. For the next step, we are going to use a 3mm tool. If you have a 3mm rod versus a stylus, I like that better. But we are going to create more teardrops. And so what I'm going to do is we want these. I know everybody works their spacing a little differently, but these teardrops are going to go in this empty space between rows 6 and 7, or ring 6 and 7, okay? So we're going to make a dot with the dotting rod and then pull it into that teardrop shape. So I will show you with my purple red. You just want to put one dot, dip and dot, one on each side of the large teardrop. And then you're going to pull it the reverse direction and create one small teardrop on each side. Just cleaning up a little bit of splatter, so don't mind me. All right, if you will notice on your step-by-step guide, the next step says chalk your path. So what I want you to do now is grab your chalk or your marking pencil, whatever you use to make your lines. And on the ring 10 here, we are going to have a large dot. So one of the final steps is a 12 millimeter circle. So I know on the very last ring, this is going to be here. You don't necessarily have to put this guy in, but I'm just showing you where we're going. All right, so up here at the end, we're going to have a large circle. On ring 9, we are going to have a smaller circle just below ring 9. And so in between rings 8 and 9, we want kind of a, I don't even know what you would call that, a petal shape. It comes up to a point. So let me show you where we are. So right next to ring 9, I've got a circle. I want the point of my petal here at the circle, and it's going to go up and around what we've done. So a circle right next to ring 9 that comes to a point. It's going to go around. And the key here is we're not going to dot on the lines, so you don't have to go all the way to the lines. Now, if you're not good at a petal shape, you can place your small dot, and you can have a straight angle if you prefer that. I'm going to try to work with a petal shape that's got a little curve to it. And remember, these are just chalk lines to show you where you're going, so they don't have to be perfect. And so on this pattern, the center dot is 4 millimeters. So it may be helpful to you to put that center dot on first so you can see where we're starting from. So 4 millimeters just next to ring 9, because remember on ring 10 we've got that large dot. So And then once you have that 4mm dot, you're going to take your 3mm stylus, so your largest stylus. You could even go to 3.5 if you, I don't have a 3.5, but if you have a 3.5, you could use that. And then we are just going to walk the dots in the shape, in the petal shape that you created. If your petal shape is a little different from mine, that's okay. And so I dip and I walk 2 lines. And so up at the top, there's 2 separate lines, one going to the right and one going to the left. And that's with our 3mm stylus. And so that's how we create this petal shape. And then of course, we're going to do that with each color. Oops, I totally used the wrong color for that one. I used my green blue instead of my green. I think it's hard when you're working with color gradients that are so similar. You know, when you break it up into 12, they start to look really similar. You can see the difference on the piece, but as you're working, sometimes they're really close. So it happens. If you break it down, if you do a gradient palette with 16. I work a lot with my 16 arm stencils. It's even harder because then it's even more subtle in between color changes. But with a black background, if you mess it up, worst case scenario, you can just use black paint and cover it and do it again. I try to catch it before I get too far, but sometimes I don't. And actually, I've got a little bit of paint smudging here where I had to fix that. So while I'm giving you all a little time to get to the same place as me, I'm just going to cover that up with black paint. All right, for the next step, so we've got these lines here, these walk the dots that we did to create this petal shape. Next to that, we have a long swipe. This can be done, it's not too long that it can't be done with a dotting tool, or if you've got a paintbrush, you can use a paintbrush. I'm going to use a paintbrush because I feel like it's easier, but just to show you that you can do it by pulling with a dotting tool, I'm going to start at ring 9. So you can make a dot, dip and dot and pull, and then just dip and dot and pull probably 3 times until you get to that end. Actually, I might just do these with since I started with this showing you either way, brush or dotting tool. I'm using my 3mm, which is my largest. And you want to pull it just until you get close to the line, but remember, don't touch those chalk lines. We want there to be a very clear separation in between sections. So we're starting at ring 9. and pulling up and out. All right, for the next step, we're going to use our 4mm rod, and just going to show you where this is going. So if you're looking at your pattern, you've got some empty space in here. That's what we're filling in, okay? I'm not working outward yet. I want to work next to this petal we've created. And so I'm using my 4mm rod, and then dip and dot once to the left and once to the right. So I'm sorry, I'm going to change this a smidge. Really, for me, this falls on ring 9. I went a little too far inside. Not a huge deal, but this is me being nitpicky. Again, it has everything to do with your spacing, but for me, ring 9 works perfect. All right, the dots we just made, on the top and bottom of these dots, there's a little swoop. So it doesn't matter how you do it as long as you do it consistently. But on the top, I went from the inside of my pattern out, and on the bottom, I went from the outside in. So however it makes sense to you. 1.5 millimeter stylus. So on the top, so I'm going from the inside out. Inside out. So each side is reversed. And then on the bottom, outside in, outside in. And then we just move through each color. Top is inside out, inside out. Bottom is outside in, outside in. All right, we are on the last paint step, and that is going to be this large circle. So it is a 12mm rod, and then it's just in the center of each section, you're going to place one large 12mm circle. The center of the circle should be on ring 10. Because this is a fairly large circle, we want the center to be on that ring. Now, if you're working towards the end of your piece, if you worked a little wider, of course, just test it out. See how much room you have. If you need to go down a size, go down a size. But take your time with these. The larger they are, the more bubbles can get caught underneath. We're just going to go through the spectrum of colors. Sometimes with these large ones, I like to go back and smooth out the paint a little bit, just to make sure there's even paint all the way around. You don't have to do that. I just felt like mine was a little globby. Had a really big bubble there. I really don't like doing large dots because of those bubbles that pop out the sides, but those can easily be fixed when it's dry by just cleaning it up with a little bit of black paint. All right, so I've done all my colors. You're just going to see me go around and clean up some of these little popped bubbles that squashed on the way out. All right, so that is the base of the design. As far as the paint goes, I'm going to close these colors just because the next step is mirrors. And I did mention in the supply list and in the email I sent today, if you don't have mirrors, it's not a huge deal. I feel like the mirrors kind of give it a little bit of that stained glass look because there's so much reflection that comes in and out of windows. But you could totally do this with gold paint or silver paint or glitter paint. You could use Nuvo drops, whatever you want to do. But I've got these mirrors, and these mirrors here are 10 millimeters. So you could also use your dotting rod. If you're using the mirrors, what I would recommend is let this dry completely. Wipe off the chalk lines because you don't want your glue to kind of squish out, and then you can't remove some of those chalk lines. But basically, we've got one 10 millimeter mirror in the center, and then two in each section, one on each side of this large dot. Okay, so if you're using mirrors, that's what you want to do. This pattern would look just as good with paint. So I'm going to do it with paint just to show you. 10 millimeter rod. So we've got our gold dot right in the center. And then in each section, you would place one to the right and one to the left of that giant dot. And then you just work your way around the circle. It's also a little easier for me to show you with the gold paint on camera just because it's not reflecting the light back at you and blinding you. But in the sample, each one of these is mirrors. Now I didn't add anything on top just because I feel like when I work with a rainbow palette, it is a little bit visually busy anyway, but you could totally top dot. There's also a lot of blank space, a lot of negative space in this painting. So if you don't like that, you can go back through and fill in some of this space. What I would recommend is just stay away from the chalk lines that cut these into pie pieces. But you can fill in and embellish however you want to. Of course, it's your piece. But for that stained glass look, stay away from the pie edges. And as always, I love it when you share your pieces. Our Facebook group is usually pretty quiet, but I love to see when you post after you create with me. So feel free to post in the Facebook group, or you can always post in the share space on the website as well. If you post in the share space on the website, people, even those who are not in the Kaleidoscope Club, anybody who's taken a class with me can see the pretty things that you make. So feel free to share. Next week is a recorded video. I did mine on a white background. Of course, you can change the background color if that's not your cup of tea. What I called next week's design Mirror and Rainbows. Today I call this one Stained Glass and Rainbows. But it's a lot dreary here in Ohio this month. We just had 6 inches of snow where I live. So I'm staying in, keeping warm, playing with my rainbows. So here is the finished piece. Thank you so much for joining me. And I can't wait to see what you create this week and next week with the video. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.